So this is our next section of Gulliver's Travels, which is part 2, A Voyage to Brobdingnag. And this section is a little bit shorter than Gulliver's Adventures in Lilliput, but you'll find that he still has some pretty ridiculous and crazy stories to go over even in this section. As we read, remember, this is a satire. So consider different social elements that were potentially happening at this time that Jonathan Swift might have wanted to criticize. On his second voyage, Gulliver finds himself marooned in Brobdingnag. Here, everything, people, animals, buildings, is 12 times larger than in England or anywhere else in the known world. The situation in part 1 is now completely reversed, and Gulliver discovers what it is like to be an insignificant, timid midget among giants. He also learns that nothing is either big or little except by comparison. All sorts of humiliating accidents happen to him. A baby picks him up and tries to suck on his head. A monkey stuffs him with food and carries him up onto a roof. He is almost drowned in a bowl of cream. A farmer exhibits him for money, as though he were a trained flea. Finally, he goes to live at court, where he tries to impress the king and queen with his importance, and especially with the importance of England and its civilization, which nobody in Brobdingnag has ever heard of. Although its inhabitants look like immense and ugly brutes, Brobdingnag is a kind of utopia, a model civilization with an enlightened and benevolent king. Notice how the king treats Gulliver in spite of his opinion of Gulliver's size and civilization. Continue to take notes as you read. From Part 2, A Voyage to Brobdingnag, by Jonathan Swift. It is the custom that every Wednesday, which as I have before observed was their Sabbath, the king and queen, with the royal issue of both sexes, dine together in the apartment of his majesty, to whom I was now become a favorite. And at these times my little chair and table were placed at the left hand before one of the salt cellars. This prince took a pleasure in conversing with me, inquiring into the manners, religion, laws, government, and learning of Europe, wherein I gave him the best account I was able. His apprehension was so clear and his judgment so exact that he made very wise reflections and observations upon all I said. But I confess that after I had been a little too copious in talking of my own beloved country, of our trade and wars by sea and land, of our schisms in religion and parties in the state, the prejudices of his education prevailed so far that he could not forbear taking me in his right hand and stroking me gently with the other. After a hearty fit of laughing, asked me whether I were a Whig or a Tory. Then, turning to his first minister, who waited behind him with a white staff, near as tall as the mainmast of the royal sovereign, he observed how contemptible a thing was human grandeur, which could be mimicked by such diminutive insects as I. And yet, said he, I dare engage those creatures have their titles and distinctions of honor. They contrive little nests and burrows that they call houses and cities. They make a figure in dress and equipage. They love, they fight, they dispute, they cheat, they betray. And thus he continued on, while my color came and went several times with indignation to hear our noble country, the mistress of arts and arms, the scourge of France, the arbitress of Europe, the seat of virtue, piety, honor, and truth, the pride and envy of the world, so contemptuously treated. But as I was not in a condition to resent injuries, so upon mature thoughts, I began to doubt whether I were injured or no. For after having been accustomed several months to the sight and converse of this people, and observed every object upon which I cast my eyes to be of proportionable magnitude, the horror I had first conceived from their bulk and aspect was so far worn off, that if I had then beheld the company of English lords and ladies in their finery and birthday clothes, acting their several parts in the most courtly manner, of strutting and bowing and prating, to say the truth, I should have been strongly tempted to laugh as much as them as this king and his grandees did at me. Neither indeed could I forbear smiling at myself when the queen used to place me upon her hand toward a looking-glass, by which both our persons appeared before me in full view together, and there could be nothing more ridiculous than the comparison, so that I really began to imagine myself dwindled many degrees below my usual size. I was frequently rallied by the queen upon account of my fearfulness, and she used to ask me whether the people of my country were as great cowards as myself. The occasion was this. The kingdom is much pestered with flies in summer, and these odious insects, each of them as big as Dunstable lark, hardly gave me any rest while I sat at dinner, with their continual humming and buzzing about my ears. They would sometimes alight upon my victuals and leave their loathsome excrement or spawn behind, which to me was very visible, though not to the natives of that country, whose large optics were not so acute as mine in viewing smaller objects. Sometimes they would fix upon my nose or forehead, where they would stung me to the quick smelling very offensively, and I could easily trace that viscous matter, which our naturalists tell us enables those creatures to walk with their feet upward upon a ceiling. I had much ado to defend myself against these detestable animals, and could not forbear starting when they came on my face. It was the common practice of the dwarf to catch a number of these insects in his hand, as schoolboys do among us, and let them out suddenly under my nose, on purpose to frighten me and divert the queen. My remedy was to cut them in pieces with my knife as they flew in the air, wherein my dexterity was much admired. He, the king, was perfectly astonished with the historical account I gave him of our affairs during the last century, protesting it was only a heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments, the very worst effects that avarice, faction, hypocrisy, perfidiousness, cruelty, rage, madness, hatred, envy, lust, malice, and ambition could produce. His Majesty in another audience was at the pains to recapitulate the sum of all I had spoken, compared the questions he made with the answers I had given. Then, taking me into his hands and stroking me gently, delivered himself in these words, which I shall never forget, nor the manner he spoke them in. My little friend Grildrig, you have made a most admirable panegyric upon your country. You have clearly proved that ignorance, idleness, and vice are the proper ingredients for a qualifying legislator, that laws are best explained, interpreted, and applied by those whose interests and abilities lie in perverting, confounding, and eluding them. I observe among you some lines of an institution when in its original might have been tolerable, but these half erased, and the rest wholly blurred and blotted by corruptions. It doth not appear from all you have said how any one perfection is required toward the procurement of any one station among you, much less that men are ennobled on account of their virtue, that priests are advanced for their piety or learning, soldiers for their conduct or valor, judges for their integrity, senators for their love of their country, or counselors for their wisdom. As for yourself, continued the king, who have spent the greatest part of your life in traveling, I am well disposed to hope you may here though have escaped many vices of your country. But by what I have gathered from your own relation and the answers I have with much pains wringed and extorted from you, I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth.